Okay, so we're talking about the portion of Vayigash, which is the second to last portion in the book of Genesis. And the big drama is the showdown between Judah and Joseph. In the beginning, Judah doesn't know it's Joseph. He thinks he's approaching the Egyptian ruler. And only after he gives his speech does the ruler break down and reveal his identity. And the saga of the brothers for the last couple of portions or the last 20 years reaches some degree of resolution because here the brothers are finally, the family is finally reunited. And finally, the family is reunited and you get some peace in the family to a degree. Maybe it's not full, but you get some degree of peace. And that scene of the opening statement of the parsha, Vayigash Elav Yehuda, and Judah approached him, meaning Joseph, is the Kabbalah looks at that story and says this is a very important story because this tension is not going anywhere. The tension between Judah and Joseph, and between, if you want to really go back a step and you want to talk about the tension between the children of Leah and the children of Rachel, which is the primary two wives of Jacob, this tension is not going anywhere. Didn't start with Judah and Joseph. It didn't start with the brothers. It started before. It started in the generation before with the mothers, where Jacob wanted to marry Rachel and ended up marrying Leah, and then married Rachel after Leah. So he's got two wives, and he's got sort of two branches of the family. And the tension is not even resolved after this parsha, even though here the family is reunited. But if you look at Jewish history, this tension flares up again. And where do you see it flaring up again? Later in history, you have the kingdom of David, and then his son Solomon, Shlomo, and they're from the tribe of Judah. So it looks like, yes, once again, David, Judah, that part of the Jewish people gets the leadership, but that only lasts. Okay, that if you want to go back a step. The first Jewish king is Solomon. I'm sorry, Saul, Shaul, tribe of Benjamin, son of Rachel. Then Saul loses the kingship, and the kingship then is transferred to descendant of Judah. Again, not from the Rachel side of the family, but from the Leah side of the family. Then for two generations, you have David reigns king. His son Solomon, Shlomo reigns king. And then after Solomon's passing, you have the tragic division of the Jewish people. There's a split. And that split was never healed, really, because the split is 10 tribes break away from Judah. And they create what they call the Northern Kingdom, led by a king from the tribe of Manasseh. I'm sorry, of Ephraim, Joseph's son. So the point here is Joseph's descendant. So the point here is that ultimately, after the Jewish people create a kingdom in Israel, it doesn't last long, and once again there's a split. And that split is a very important split because there's at least these two important streams within the Jewish people are different. And then if you want to talk about the end of days, the Haftorah talks about the end of days. And the Haftorah, the section from the prophets that we read after the portion, talks about the idea that we're going to have the reunification of the two kingdoms, the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, and the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, which is descendant of Joseph. And in the end of days, they'll be reunited, and there'll be one leader, and the leader will be, says the prophet, my servant David. So there's going to be a reunification, and at the end of days, reunification to one, and David is the leader. So the point here is the tension didn't start with Judah and Joseph. It started before them, and the tension does not resolve after the story. It's going to be a very clear tension later in Jewish history, and there's going to be a split, and ultimately reunification. And ultimately, there's going to be a leader to this reunification. This is just to point out that there's a lot of tension here in this division. And then the question is, what is the application of this to our life, to every individual person's life? And what is the application, sort of the cosmic application? So there's many layers where you could look at the story. So that is just to get us into it. And again, there's different ways to think about this, how it applies to us. Like the Zohar talks about different parts of prayer, which are a little bit different or in conflict, and they have to reunite. And you have in our life, every person's personal life, every person's personal relationship, you'll have the Judah approach and the Joseph approach, and they're a little bit in conflict. And the question is, could you get them to meet? Because that's essentially what this scene is, Judah and Joseph approaching each other and reuniting. So that's the big picture that we have to discuss. And then there's all kinds of side points that come out of that. So that's the roadmap for today. If anybody has any comments or questions or want to direct me or redirect me to a different direction, or can we include
So,
something?
so,
Story?
so Judah was part of the Leah side of the family.
Yeah, yeah, because Leah has six children, six sons, and the fourth is Judah. So, and then you have Rachel has Joseph and Benjamin, just Joseph and Benjamin. And the other four are the maidservants of Leah is two, is Bilhah is the maidservant of Rachel, and Zilpah is the maidservant of Leah. They have another four children combined. But the
Mm.
leader, who is the leader? The leader is either Judah or Joseph, which is basically the sons of Leah or the sons of Rachel. And because Reuven is the oldest of Leah's children, but he loses ultimately Judah emerges as the leader of the tribe of Leah, a leader of the family of Leah, if you see what I'm saying. And then you have this sort of back and forth in Jewish history of who is going to be the leader between the Jewish people. You want to go back Moshe. Moshe is the son of Leah. Joshua, his successor, is Ephraim, the son of Joseph, which is Rachel. Right? So you keep going back and forth. And then it's very clear with the kings. With the kings, you go son of Rachel, son of Leah, split. Right? So
Wait,
that
wait, wait, wait.
the kings, the first king of
Moshe,
Saul,
Moshe
Moses
is
himself, Moses is a Levite. Levi is the son of Leah. Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim, which is essentially the tribe of Joseph. We read next week how Joseph breaks into the two of Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, become two tribes. So there's no longer a tribe of Joseph, there's Manasseh and Ephraim.
Hmm.
So Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim. So Joshua, the one who brings the Jewish people into Israel, unlike Moshe, who is the son of Leah, Joshua is the descendant of Leah, of Joseph, of Leah. Now, sometimes the tension is not so pronounced. So it's okay. One can go from one half of the family to the other half of the family. It's not always pronounced, but there are certain times in history where the tension and the what's the word I'm looking for? The rift or the connection. You have the parts where they meet. There's stress on the points that separate the family. Sometimes there's no stress on that points. We have other stresses. We're thinking about ourselves in the context of the broader world. The divisions between the people are not so important, but sometimes the differences between the people, there's a stress on that difference, and then you have to sort of figure out: do I want that person to lead me, or do I need someone from my family? And that's how this plays out. The point of the matter is, this is not a specific feud that happened in one generation. This carries through all of Jewish history. And therefore, from the Kabbalah's perspective, we have to talk about it. It's not just a question of how do I get along with my brother, but it's what are the big forces that we have in the universe, within religion, within relationships, and how does this represented with Judah and Joseph? So there's the Kabbalah is very interested in this scene because even though it seems like a technicality, Judah approached Joseph. No, this Judah approaching Joseph is is a cosmic event. It's a cosmic event, and like I said, it's not the completion of this tension. It's resolving of this tension to a degree. It's actually it's the showdown of this tension, and then it's resolved to a degree, but then it flares up again, and ultimately it's not going to be resolved till the end of days. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Judaism, at least as portrayed by most of our meetings, was a foundation in democracy. In sort of everyone is a child of God, very different, you said, than the Roman and Greek conceptualizations. So my question is this: how come our leaders were never picked by election?
So that's a good question. First, I'll say a few things. First of all, leaders are always picked by election. Always. In other words, even the monarch. Let me give you an example. King Solomon. The monarch. Just the fact that there's a secession, just 10 tribes secede. There's no such thing as you're the king and therefore we have to follow you. Kingship in biblical Hebrew, there's a different word for a king and for a dictator. And one is a melech, one's a king. And built into the term melech is that the people accept his kingship. It's a monarchy by the will of the people. And if it's not by the will of the people, the Bible doesn't call it as a melech. It calls it Moshe, a ruler. A ruler is not a king. Now, just to give you one example where I say everything has to be by consent is, for example, you had King David. King David was appointed king, was anointed as king by Samuel, by the prophet of God, undisputed prophet of God. King David was appointed by Samuel in the life of Shaul. So this is like God saying, you're the one. Now, how long did it take him to become the actual king? It took him a very long time. First of all, a few years till Saul passed away. But more importantly, after Saul passed away, initially, the Bible says, and it's documented clearly, that King David was the king only of his own tribe. For 7 years, he was the king only of his own tribe. Only later did the rest of the tribe say, you know what? We want David to be our king. So if you follow the stories of how Jewish monarchy developed, it's almost like we could talk about this about the sages. It's always by the consent of the people. If the people don't want it, you can't be their king. And if the people want to secede, they secede. And it's also true later on in Judaism with when you move from kings and priests to rabbis. What makes a great rabbi is that the people accept it. People accept him. And also the validity or the mandate of rabbinic law is only because the people accept it. The rabbis don't have power. The rabbis are only powerful to the extent that the people accept their interpretations and their enactments. And so in that sense, when you say the word king, kings can mean many different things to many different people. So I'm not going to argue it was democracy like today, but there was no such thing as a king who governed in Judaism, who governed against the will of the people. That doesn't really happen. Go ahead, follow up.
Well, rabbi, is a difference in England, for example. The kings are simply hereditary. And when Victoria...
Here it's not. Even though God himself said, I want the king to be of the house of David. And God said it's going to be the house of David. So what could you have more than that? The prophet promises David that you're going to be the king forever. The dynasty is going to be from David. So what could be a greater endorsement? Yet 10 tribes say, we're not interested. David wants to be a king. Let him be the king of Judah. And that was also endorsed by the prophet. The prophet himself, Achia himself backed the 10 tribes seceding, even though God said that it's going to be David. Because David has to be a king, meaning David will be king over his tribe. Whether or not that endorsement is going to apply to all the people, that depends on the people.
Well, you see, but you talk about the fact that basically David was anointed not by the king, by Saul, but by Samuel.
Yes.
And then you said accepted. Well, in an election, someone isn't anointed and then accepted, they're elected. So the point is there is a difference. And what about the Rebbe? Is the Rebbe the follower followed him as his son? Or someone picked him and then everybody else said, we'll accept him, which is different than you get together, you and everybody else from Chabad, and you have a vote.
Yeah, so I'll say it again. First, I'm not arguing that it's exactly democratic. But I'm just saying that it's not obviously not the same idea as a democracy where every person gets a vote every 4 years. But the point is, there is no such thing long-term leadership without the consent of the people. With Jewish leadership, in other words, religious leadership, and the Rebbe, and also great rabbis, it's 100% by the Rebbe only becomes Rebbe because the people want him to. There's no such thing as at least not in Chabad, but also there's no such thing as the person is the heir, and there was a descendant, a direct descendant, and that's the only reason why he leads. And if you look at within Chabad history, not always was the Rebbe the son. Sometimes it was a relative, usually in the family, but there's no such thing. Yeah, there's no political power. The rabbi or the sage or the Rebbe doesn't have political power. Doesn't have, at least not in Chabad, doesn't have any money. It's by the will of the people, 100%. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I think the idea of democracy is is consent of the governed. And I think it's bottom up rather than top down. And this is just a different way of achieving the consent,
Yeah,
now.
I agree.
So it's not, it may not look like, like our elections, and frankly, our elections, it's not even clear, to what extent those are democratic. There's a lot of but the underlying principle is what we're trying to achieve is consent of the governed, you
Right.
know,
And I agree that I would say that I don't think that if you lived in ancient Israel, the individual himself had as much say as the individual today. And even though I don't know that individuals today do have, but we're talking about in broad strokes. If you want to talk about the tribe, no tribe is going to be governed by by an outside force without its own consent. And history shows it. And history, what's interesting is that even when we come in the name of God, like the kings of Europe said, we're God, we're kings because God appointed us to the Jewish people, that doesn't mean anything. Just God made you a prophet, so you're anointed, wonderful, mazel tov. Does that mean I have to listen to you? It means God made you a king. Doesn't mean I have to listen to you. I only listen to you if I accept you as my king. And by the way, the same thing happened with priesthood. It's another whole story with Pinchas. With Pinchas was appointed in the Torah. The Torah himself says that Pinchas will be a prophet, will be a priest, and nobody accepted him. They didn't like him. And only later, in the end of the time, in the life of right after the passing of Joshua, when he averted a war, did he become the priest? Did they accept him as a priest? So there's always that idea that just because God endorses you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you get the role. It means that you're selected for the role. You're nominated for the role. Whether or not you're accepted for the role, that has to be by the people.
it's distinguished from an army marching in, and if someone disagrees with you, you shoot them.
Correct.
Like,
Correct.
when you look at some of the stuff you see on the streets today in Hamas, in Gaza, it's like, oh, you disagree, you're publicly executed, that isn't what this is. Just a different way of achieving consent, it seems to me.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, let's go to the big picture and say what exactly is the tension here, and Judah and Joseph, and where the different places where they play out. So if we want to go straight to that, I want to start at the end. There's just look at the names. Yosef. Yosef means to add, to grow. And according to the Kabbalah, well, why did she name him Yosef? Yosef would mean because she had a child. Joseph has two really meanings. Yosef could mean to add, but also mean to gather in. So it's funny because she mentions both those names. She says, Rachel says, Asaf Elokim et cherpati. God gathered in my shame. But that's not so Asaf, Yosef, it's similar, but that's not the reason why she names him Yosef. Why does she name him Yosef? Because she says, Yosef Hashem li ben acher. God should add another son. Because she had one son, and everybody else had more than one son. Her sister had six, the maidservants had two apiece, and she wanted another son. So she prayed and she said, Yosef Hashem li ben acher, God should increase another son, which is actually a very bad name. If Joseph ever went to the shrink, or to his therapist and said, why did your mother name you Yosef? Oh, because my mother wanted another child. I wasn't enough, right? So it's actually a funny name to name your child, to add because I want another child. So there has to be more to that. So from the Kabbalah's perspective, add is not just add another child. Joseph is always increasing. Joseph is the idea of increasing. Yes, increasing another child as well, but it's what he represents is growth. Joseph represents growth because growth is added and personal growth. And what parts of the person grow? Well, in the Kabbalah, it's very much into intelligence and emotion. Person's intelligence grows over time, and a person's emotions grow over time. Because yes, emotions essentially are in a way they stay the same throughout the life. I want what's good for me. I want what I perceive as good for me. But what that is develops, right? When I was a little kid, I thought the sandbox was fun. Then I learned that Lego was fun. Then I realized that a trust fund is fun. Money is fun. You grow in your emotional life, and hopefully you also grow more mature emotionally, but also and intellectually you grow. So Joseph is the idea of growth, and in the Kabbalah, that's internalization of understanding and feeling. And we could talk about this because we talk about animal life and and vegetation is the symbol for intelligence and emotion. And that's Joseph, and that's personal growth. And Joseph is this model in the Torah of someone, first of all, he's beautiful, he's handsome, he's good looking, he's extremely successful, and he's in a constant state of growth, meaning no matter, even though circumstances keep pushing him down, and he keeps falling from very high place in his father's home, first to a slave and then imprisoned. So he's constantly being pushed down, but wherever he is, he's being successful in climbing to the top of that environment. When he's a slave, he's ruling his master's home. When he's put in prison, he's ruling the prison. Then when he's released, he's ruling Egypt. He always floats to the surface. He always grows. He always grows and becomes and maximizes the opportunities that he has. Regardless, being in Egypt, he's the number one. Like it says, it's a different skill set to run a prison, to run your master's home, and to run the economy. But wherever he is, he's always growing. So even though he's going, his trajectory is going down, but in every environment, he's always growing to the top. So that's Joseph. And Joseph, so yes, we have a critique of Joseph that as a youngster, when he was 17, he was still very immature, and he maybe provoked the jealousy of his brothers. But if you want to talk about character development, Joseph is the epitome of character development to the extent that he doesn't harbor any negativity against his brothers. And Joseph is probably the first full example of forgiveness in the Torah. And the person that he's like a model. He's like a model child, a model person, model citizen, model leader. If you skip the area right in the beginning of his life, it's very clear. Well, don't skip that. Include that. From there, it looks like he's a constant state trajectory of growth. So that's Joseph, and that's beautiful. And you understand why Joseph is a model for a leader, and that's why 10 of the tribes, when they want a leader, they want the descendant of Joseph, and they secede and they appoint Yeravam, the son of Nevat, from a descendant of Joseph. So that's the Joseph side of the equation. Then we have to go to the Judah side of the equation. Go ahead. Ben raised his hand first, but Vicky didn't speak yet. So ladies first. We'll give Vicky the microphone. Go ahead,
Absolutely.
Vicky. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. I actually don't have a question, but I had a question, but I think you started answering it because the ascent of Joseph directly connected to change of his character. On the previous lesson, we started with naming him a narcissist. Narcissist never changes. Joseph is an example of somebody who, because he made some mistakes or misunderstood something, he became more aware of his environment. He became very mature in his relationships and understanding other people, to the point that he even tricked his brothers, to repent. So
Right.
this is just not just a model. He just model in all kind of respects. So you cannot call him narcissist even in the beginning.
Right. Because you say a real narcissist is not going to change. But we agree with me. We're on the same page that Joseph is about growth. Joseph is personal growth. At every stage of his life, he's growing, and he's actually, in a way, he's surprising his brothers. They don't think such growth is possible, and they don't really think he forgave them. At this point, you'll see that they think he's not taking retribution of them because his father is alive. But once his father dies, they're afraid he's going to take retribution, and that's exactly what happens after the father dies in next week's parsha. They once again say, "We apologize. We'll be your slaves. We'll be your slaves, and we'll be your slaves." And Joseph is like, he's not able to convince them that they're not convinced. Like they can't imagine such growth, that Joseph would be completely forgiving for this terrible crime of sale of your brother as a slave. So Joseph's growth is so unusual and outstanding that it's incredulous. It's incredible. But they don't think it's possible. But that just makes the point that Joseph is a symbol of growth. Go ahead, Ben, please.
Yeah, I know Joseph gets a lot of credit for that. And obviously that is true about forgiveness and not having, but can you say there's a lot of ink that is devoted to his feigning, not identifying himself by sending one of his brothers into prison, and as a hostage, and not divulge, I mean, obviously the big drama is that he says, I am Joseph, your brother, but there's a lot in between there where he's sort of toying with them and frankly, you know, almost getting a little bit of revenge. It almost
Right.
feels.
Yeah, so I agree with you, and I don't want to litigate that because that's a whole subject for itself. But I would say that even if we, at the final analysis, after reading all the commentary, and I think we could make a case that this is very impressive what he did, but let's assume we disagree with what he did, right? But we have to at least understand that he had an intention, a positive intention. And from his perspective, he was doing the right thing, and it wasn't personal. It wasn't personal. It was to get them to repent, whatever the case is. The point is that you know what, I'll take your point. Even let's say he was doing something negative for them. Not that I think that, but that he grows from there. That's the point. He keeps growing. No one's perfect, but his trajectory is upward. He's growing. He's increasing personal growth. He doesn't stop trying to become a better person. And it takes a lot of discipline because he puts his money where his mouth is. He says, I see, he says in this week's Parsha, I see the God sent me here. And he could have had all the excuses to be vengeful and to say you're terrible people and I want nothing to do with you, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, he chooses to see only the good. And that takes discipline. Not everybody is capable of doing that all the time. Now, was this the ultimate full forgiveness? Maybe not. He didn't live with them afterward. There was certain separation between him and them, but that's already. Uh, I think we're asking a lot of him, and I think we could agree that in broad strokes, Joseph represents even in his name is growth, and his story is a story of growth, and his story, and he represents in the Kabbalah, he represents the heart, the mind, which in a mature person, our thing, especially the mind, always seeks growth, and the heart also follows the mind in a mature person. So I think that's Joseph. And then we have to look at the other side of the coin of Judah and see what Judah represents and how they interact or they don't interact, or how they like each other or they don't like each other, and how that plays out. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Rabbi, you're probably going to get to this next, but I can't resist the fun of asking it to you. Since basically the core aspect of Judaism is growth, and Heshbon Nefesh, and all the things we're supposed to do to keep growing spiritually and emotionally is growth, then why aren't we called the Joes?
Oh, very
Because
good. Very good.
Judah, we're called Jews, which is short for Judah, and short for Joseph is Joes. So why don't I say I'm a Joe?
I'll tell you right now that for the first 1,000 years of Jewish history.
I even got a laugh out of Ben. And Vicky's always laughing at her pictures. I don't know whether she's laughing or not.
We're always just we're just a regular Joe. I would tell you for the first 1,000 years of Judaism, we were not Jews because Jew is Judah, and there's no reason for us to be called Jews. What were we called in the Torah? Israelites, children of Israel, or Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. We're Israelites. Israel is the name of the father because Jacob's second name was Israel. Or change name, God changes his name or adds the name Israel. So you're right. It's a big question why we are called Jews to begin with. And it only happens, there's the historical reasons and the spiritual reasons, but if you want to just stay simple, the historic reason is because 10 of the tribes that were the kingdom of Israel were exiled, and many people believe they were lost. So essentially what was left that was not invaded and exiled was only the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. So you had Judah, Benjamin was with Judah, and then you had some priests that were with Judah, and then you had individuals from the other tribes who were with Judah, but the kingdom was the kingdom of Judea. And that's why we're called Jews. That's the historic reason. There's Kabbalistic reasons, but I'm going to save that for later today. But you're right, it's a very interesting point. And you're right, when the Jewish people split to the two kingdoms, even before that, we were not Jews. Jews is only one. Jews are only Judeans. That's only one tribe. But what about Joseph? Joseph is a whole strand of leadership and associated very much with the 10 tribes. And the Torah always tells us to follow the majority. They had the majority, right? They had 10 out of 12 tribes. Okay, so we turn for a second and we say, so what does Judah represent? If Joseph is growth, and growth can mean different things because you can grow in different areas, but we're going to primarily talk about it, intellectual growth and emotional growth. Judah is not about necessarily growth. Judah is about, I don't know what the best word is, acknowledgement. Yehuda, she says, Apam odet Hashem. Now I'll be grateful to God, because when her fourth son was born, Judah is the fourth son of Leah. So when Leah was born, she says, Apam odet Hashem. Now I'll offer thanks to God. So it's interesting that the word Jew comes from the word to acknowledge and to offer and be grateful. So that's very interesting that we become the people of gratitude. But that's already another discussion. The bottom line is that Judah in Hebrew, the connection between the word to be grateful and to offer thanks is also to acknowledge in a way as in to submit, meaning to acknowledge that you are your perspective and maybe you are correct. So the same word for offering thanks in Hebrew is the same word as saying, I acknowledge that you're right. And that's a very interesting discussion. If you're interested, we can get into that and unpack that. But the point is, for the purpose of our discussion, Judah is not necessarily growth, not necessarily understanding and feeling, but it is the submission of commitment. What is commitment? Commitment means I may not understand that this is I may not understand this is the best way to operate. I may think and want to do something a little bit different. Let's say in a relationship. What makes sense to me is something different, but I acknowledge your perspective. And because I want this relationship, I'm willing to commit to you. And commitment is different than understanding and feeling. It's almost the opposite. Because if I loved this, then I wouldn't need commitment. Commitment is when the love is not felt, right? If I say, I will come to work, someone hires me, and I say, I'm very happy to work. I'm going to come to work every single day. I'm going to come to work whenever I love my job, okay? So out of 365 days of the year, how many days am I going to come to work? Even if I come 364, I'm not going to come 365 because not every day do I love my job, or not every minute do I love my job. Sometimes I'm here because I committed. I committed and I'm here. And commitment means I don't necessarily love to be here right now. I'd rather be at the beach in Florida. Trust me, not me personally. I'd rather be here. But some people, instead of going to work, would rather be playing golf. Okay? So, but why am I here? I'm here because I committed. And why am I in this relationship? Because I committed. And if your little baby cries at night and you get up to feed them, why you want to do that? Not necessarily, but that's the commitment. And that bond and that commitment and that hodah, that acknowledging, that is very different than it's not I-centered, it's the other-centered. Whereas personal growth, love, and understanding is very much about the self. And a person needs both. And the question is, which one is in the driver's seat? And here you have the conflict between Judah and, not the conflict, you have the divergence of Judah and Joseph. And we can talk about how it plays out in history too. We can talk about how it plays out within the person. There's a lot to talk about, but that's the big idea here that we could develop. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin.
I heard before, Rabbi, that part of the essence of Judah is acknowledgement that I was wrong, and the admission that perhaps I made a mistake and I did something wrong, with a desire to change. And maybe that's a central ingredient, if that's true, and that's not just something I heard incorrectly, but if that's true, then maybe a central ingredient of Judaism is accepting responsibility for errors and acknowledging that I made a mistake instead of constantly finding a way to blame other people.
Correct. So taking responsibility, but I'm going to add even more. I'm going to say, sometimes I know I'm wrong. Sometimes in other words, I have a new perspective. I thought I was right. Now I learned I'm wrong. Sometimes I don't even know that I'm wrong. For example, let's play out this disagreement that I'm sure has happened in therapy before. Let's say spouse one tells spouse two, you offended me. And spouse two said, I never meant to offend you. I didn't think I offended you. But the other spouse says, I was offended. Now, how do you proceed from here, right? I'm not talking about lip service. What do you really feel? So one way to do it is to say, I insist, I'm not guilty. I'm not going to apologize because I had no evil intention and had no intention to offend you. And I'm going to stand firm because I'm a good person and I would never think to offend you and I didn't offend you. And if you tell me that I offended you, then I'm offended now that you think I offended you. Okay? No, seriously, I'm talking for my own life. And then you have somebody else says, look, I don't think I offended you, but I acknowledge that other people are entitled to see the world differently than I. And my perspective is different than yours. And you know what? I give it to you that you were offended by something I said. And if I did it differently, I would not be offended. So in other words, when I mean taking responsibility and admission and apologizing, it's not just when I know I'm wrong. It's even when I don't know I'm wrong, I could submit to your perspective. Now, it doesn't mean I have to abandon my perspective. That's a very important point. And I talked about, we had Dr. Tamara, and we had these discussions in the past. It doesn't mean that I do not have my perspective, but it means that I acknowledge that your perspective is valid, and I'm going to do certain things based on your perspective. Let me give you an example, just a Talmudic example to make it a little bit more, to take away the emotional side. You have a disagreement between Rabbi Meir and the sages. And sometimes it says that Rabbi Meir acknowledges with the sages, says, you know what, you're right. It doesn't, but he uses the term modim, modeh, I acknowledge. What does that mean? It means, of course, I don't see the world this way, but I could see why in this situation, let's follow your path. But you see what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say you could still retain your perspective. You could still say, I don't love this. I'm doing this because of a commitment to you and your perspective. I'm retaining my perspective, but I'm committing to you and following your perspective. That is the idea of both apology and gratitude, by the way. Because if you want to take this for a second and say, what is the stumbling block to gratitude? How come most people, I don't want to generalize, many people are not grateful? And especially to the people who do the most for them. So I could speak because I'm both a parent and a child. So I could speak a little bit. And I could say like this, that it's especially hard for children to be grateful to parents. Why? Because they take it for granted. What does it mean take it for granted? They say, what do you mean you do this for me? You're my parent. It's your responsibility. And in a way, that's true. But what don't they see? They don't see the parent's perspective, and they don't see the sacrifice and the commitment that the parent has. Why not? Because they're looking at it from their own perspective. From my perspective, you're my parent. You have to take care of me. I don't see your perspective, which is all the things you sacrifice for me that you didn't have to. So the ability to be able to say thank you is the ability to stop seeing the world from my perspective and start seeing the world from your perspective, and therefore feeling grateful. But it's a very hard thing to do, to see the world from someone else's perspective, and therefore it's a very hard thing to really be grateful. But that's why grateful and acknowledgement and taking responsibility is all the same skill. It's the skill of being able to see the world from the other person's perspective. Meaning, it's not about what I love or how I understand. That's Joseph. That's personal growth, that I'm invested in my growth. But then in a relationship, there's the idea of submission. There's somebody else. And whether or not I feel or I understand, in this transaction, it doesn't matter. I mean, in the general relationship, you must have both. That's going to be the whole point here. You must have Judah, you must have Joseph. You must have personal growth, you must have personal cultivation, and you also have to have the idea to be able to set yourself aside and commit to somebody else. Both are necessary. We're never going to have a complete split between the two. The question is, which one is more dominant? That's the question. And that's here the tension between Judah and Joseph. Go ahead, Vicky.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for that. It was a very good point and very important. I just want to add to that seeing somebody else's perspective, not only important for relationships, it's probably Joseph had that too. I don't know. It's not only Judah, but seeing each other's perspective also like an antidote to brainwashing, because one-sidedness, if you only see one side, you can easily manipulate it.
Right. But let's say I sat and I discussed, and I know this is not what I want. So some people say, it's not what I want, so I'm not doing it. And some people say, it's not what I want, but I want something else. I also want a relationship. And if I want to connect to other people, I also have to learn how to submit. And submit doesn't mean lose my perspective, but it means for the purpose of this interaction, I'm willing to do this because this is good for you. And this is what you want. And it makes you happy. And if it makes you happy, then ultimately it's meaningful to me, but not because it's consistent with my perspective or my way of life or my goal or what I want right now.
Yeah, and that's beautiful, and and we have to thank Judaism for that, and Talmud in particular for being able to see both sides of the coin
Right, right, right.
and see other person perspective, even if you don't disagree. If you
Correct,
disagree.
correct, correct, correct. And then you have the whole idea of yeah, Shoshana's writing in the chat that in a way we talk to God and we say, Modani, I acknowledge to you. And this and the Kabbalists talk about this. What does it mean that I acknowledge? I offer thanks, yes. But in Hebrew, offering thanks is also acknowledging. And acknowledging means I acknowledge that you're right, which means if we keep telling God that you're right, meaning at some degree there's a dispute between us and God, how could there be a dispute between us and God? And the answer is there's a very big dispute between us and God. What's the big dispute between us and God? The essential dispute is the nature of reality. What is real? So, from God's perspective, reality is godliness, and the physical world is not real because, to the extent it's not real, because it's dependent on the divine life to create it. So the physical world is not an independent reality. So it's not a true reality. It's real, but it's real only to the extent that God is creating it. What is our perspective? Our perspective is the opposite. Our perspective is physical. Reality is reality. Spiritual ideas is abstract. We don't really understand it. We don't really see it. We can't really relate fully. So the most basic thing when we say we acknowledge that God is right, meaning we're saying, God, I don't necessarily see the world the way you do, but I acknowledge that you have a perspective. And I want to feel that perspective where spirituality is the reality. And sometimes, both when we relate to God and when we relate to another person, you have to temporarily block your vision to see the other person's vision. And that's also something that we do physically, is that we actually cover our eyes when we say the Shema. Why do we cover our eyes to say the Shema? So you're going to say because we don't want to distract ourselves. So we want to say the most important statement of Judaism. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So we don't want to be thinking about what's in front of our eyes, so we cover our eyes. But on a deeper level, to say God is one, meaning to say everything in the reality is all connected to his oneness, that's not our perspective. That's God's perspective. So then we have to say Shema, cover our eyes, and say reality the way I perceive it is not the only way to think about it. There's also reality the way God perceives it. And now when I say Shema, at least for those 10 seconds, I want to perceive reality from God's perspective. Now, after I open my eyes, I don't walk around my whole day with my eyes covered, then I'm going to crash into a pole. So after I have to uncover my eyes and see, could I somehow make the peace between both perspectives? But it's true also in a relationship. If you want to have a relationship with somebody, at least occasionally you have to have the ability to cover your eyes and say, okay, I understand this is how I see the world. How do they see the world? And it doesn't mean I have to forget about the way I see the world, but it means that for a time I could say, Modeh, I acknowledge, but I acknowledge implies that I don't necessarily agree. I acknowledge your perspective, and I may be able to take certain action based on your perspective, but it doesn't mean that I'm abandoning my own. And that's the Judah approach and the Judah mentality. Now, one way to think about this, if you want to talk about the broad question, which always comes up in Judaism, about what is more important and what is more critical to a person's life, whether it is study or feeling. Study and feeling I'm putting in the same category, meaning internal feeling and internal connection to what I'm doing, or action. I'm doing the mitzvah. And if I could set up we could set up a sort of scientific experiment where we can isolate both of these, where one person really has a great feeling of understanding about God and great feeling of love to God, but doesn't do the actual mitzvah, versus somebody who maybe doesn't feel anything, but actually does the mitzvah. So here we have a conflict between Judah and Joseph, because Joseph is the idea of cultivating inner connection, inner feeling, and inner appreciation, which is the mind, and feeling, which is the heart. And that's what Joseph's model is. So in the Talmudic question of what is more greater, Talmud or Maaseh, study or action, Joseph represents the study side, and study is not just study per se. Study is identification, intellectual identification, and intellectual awareness, which then leads to emotional bonds. So Joseph represents the idea that I'm doing a mitzvah or not doing it. I'm infused with an understanding of the appreciation of God and a feeling of connection to God. And Judah represents I'm doing the right thing. And maybe I don't feel that this is the right thing. Maybe I don't want to do it, but ultimately I do the right thing. And by the way, if you want to go through this, if you want to look at the stories of Judah, Judah almost always does if you judge Judah just on his actions, it's usually he has good actions. His intention is not always great, but his actions are usually justified. So it's a very interesting thing the way that plays out, both in the story of the sale of Joseph, where his action is the ultimately saves Joseph from dying in the pit, and ultimately his actions could be attributed to one of the causes of Joseph becoming the leader of Egypt. So if you just judge him on the action per se, you could say that's a good action. And certainly with the story of Judah and Tamar, where Judah has relations with Tamar, then has a child with Tamar, two children, really twins, Peretz and Zerach, and that becomes the dynasty of King David and the dynasty of the Davidic dynasty and the kings of David and the Messiah. So clearly that action of that marriage, that interaction was good, was positive, especially that she had to marry someone in the family. He didn't know it. His intention was negative. He thinks she's a harlot. But you see, with Judah, you could make the case that his actions, if you judge him by his actions are okay. And that's consistent with the Kabbalistic notion of Judah represents the action. You're doing the right thing, even if you don't necessarily identify with it intellectually or emotionally. And then you have the question, what is more important? Is it intellectual and emotional identification with the concept that I love God, that I understand, by the way, God or person or spouse or child? Or I don't really love my child right now, but I drove them to the airport. That's an action, right? So which one is more powerful? Which one is more profound? You need to do both, of course. Who's the leader? Who's the leader? Okay. Go ahead, Vicky.
And probably in Joseph's case, it is the study, the understanding, the self-refinement and self-development, but it does lead to very good actions, I have to admit. And
Yeah.
actions that we all need to kind of find out what's his secret and maybe try to implement in our own lives. Because even his trickery with his brothers, I mean, it's ingenious, because without it, they won't be able to repent.
Right.
So
But I would say this.
in
Okay, go ahead.
Joseph's case, it is the dominant is self development and understanding, but it leads to very good actions,
Okay,
and
so
it's beautiful that we study both sides.
okay, now let me just say something to make it more radical. Okay, I'm going to make it a little more radical just for Vicky. Joseph, let's say I'm going along with you. Joseph is inspired action. Judah is action of commitment and submission without the inspiration. Now I'm making it a harder choice, right? Here you have Joseph is doing the right thing and he's infused with emotion. And it's like you go and you buy something for someone because you feel the love for them. You buy them flowers and you feel the love. That's one thing. And the other that's Joseph. But there's no act of submission there. There, the action is nothing but an expression of the feeling. That's a beautiful thing. Who could knock that? This is the most beautiful thing in the world. This man is, I don't want to say perfect. No one's perfect, but this person's has got a man on every base. He's identifies with intellectually, identifies emotionally, and it expresses itself in an action. That's one thing. On the other hand, you have somebody who is, I'm not in the mood. I don't feel like it. I don't want to go to Passover Seder. I don't want to do this. I'll eat the matzah. Okay, so that's someone where the action is an act of submission. The same action could be an action that expresses internal connection, or it could be an act of submission. And the radical idea of Judaism, at least according to the Kabbalah, is ultimately we need both, of course. So in other words, in a relationship, what's more important, the love or the commitment? So you could say, if I love you, I'm also going to buy you a coffee. Yes, that's not the question. The question is, are you going to buy me a coffee when you're not in the mood of going to buy me a coffee? That's the question. In other words, could you put the whole relationship on love alone? And not only love alone, of course you need both, but ultimately, what's the stronger foundation? How are we deeper connected? When I do something because I feel the connection to you, or when I do it despite the fact that I don't feel the connection? And that's a very profound question. And I'll tell you right now what the Kabbalah is going to say right now in this world, there's no question that Joseph is the model and everybody sees the superiority of Joseph. But in the Kabbalah, and just action is the lowest in the hierarchy of relationship. You have intelligence, you have emotion, you have action, and action is the lower end of the hierarchy. But ultimately, in the Messianic era, in other words, you want to get to the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is the deepest connection is created through the action, through the submission. That's ironic, and we talk about why that is in a second. But the point here is that that's why ultimately the lowest is rooted in the highest place, and that's why the action ultimately is even greater than the connection between intelligence and emotion. And part of that is this. There's a lot more to say about this, but I don't know how much time we're going to have to elaborate. But ultimately, it's like this. Let's talk first. We'll talk about God, and then we'll talk about other people. With God, it's clear that no matter how much I understand of God or feel God, that's not the ultimate, because there's no way I can grasp the essence of God. So in a way, if I say I understand that it's important to connect to God, and I'm making my relationship predicating it on understanding and feeling, you can never grasp God. You can only grasp some sliver and some ray of God, but the essence of God cannot be grasped. So ultimately, no matter how much you understand Him, no matter how much you think you don't understand God. So ultimately, if you really want to connect to God, where could you connect to God? In the act of submission. Because the act of submission means I'm saying I'm opening up myself to the will of God. But it's not about my understanding, because my understanding, no matter how much I understand, like the Jewish philosopher said, the ultimate understanding is to understand that you cannot understand. So ultimately, in the relationship with God, if you really want to get to the truth, no, like the Zohar, everyone says it in other words, no mind can grasp God. So the point is that so clearly action by virtue of the fact that it's not limited to what I want. It's about what God wants that connects me to the essence. And I could say, it doesn't say this in this discourse, but I could say the same thing is true about other people. That with other people, that ultimately, if you're talking about relationship, love is still about myself. When do I escape self? I escape self not in the action that is submerged, that is an expression and infused with feeling. It's still about me. I love you. I buy you flowers. It's still about me. In any statement of I love, continue the statement, you cannot escape the I. Where would you escape the I? Where is it about the other person, with certainly the essence of the other person? That's where it's not about me, it's about you. And then Ben says, those Chabad align with Judah and Joseph. Chabad is very aligned with the idea that the ultimate connection is Judah. The ultimate connection. And that's why Chabad has the idea of the mitzvah campaign. Stop a Jew on the street and say, put on tefillin. Stop a woman on the street and say, light Shabbos candles. That's absurd. For most people, when the Rebbe started these campaigns, completely and totally absurd. You want to affect somebody? Take them to yeshiva, study Torah for a few years, then tell them to do a mitzvah. What's the value of doing a mitzvah without understanding? Right? That's the conventional view. The conventional view is Joseph's view. But Judaism insists that no, there's the ultimate connection, at least from the Kabbalah's perspective. Judaism, you can argue, but I would make the argument that this is Judaism's perspective. But Judaism articulates this, and therefore the people who are more connected to the Kabbalah see this. But it's also in Jewish law. If you ask the person to fulfill the commandment, you actually have to eat the matzah. You can't say I feel free. Right? You have to actually do the mitzvah. So the point here is that the idea that ultimately to connect to God and to connect to another person is transcendence of self. Transcendence of self is Judah. Now, it's not enough to transcend yourself. You also have to grow. It's not about me. You have to grow, and you have to understand, and you have to spend your life studying and internalizing, and then you realize that internalization and study doesn't grasp the essence of God. But that doesn't absolve you from trying to understand as much as you can. So we're not bashing Joseph, but ultimately there's a conflict. Ultimately, both are important. But if you want to say, and that's why in the Haftorah, you need one, the Jews will be united. The branch of Ephraim, branch of Judah, which is Joseph and Judah, are going to be united. But then it says there's going to be one leader, and the leader is David. Because ultimately, you have to say, what is the essence? And the essence cannot be grasped by understanding, not the essence of God, but not the essence of another person. Cannot be grasped by understanding, cannot be grasped by feeling, it can be grasped by commitment. In a way, transcendence of self, negation of self. Then it's about you. If it's about you, I can get to you. So this is where the Kabbalah, one of the important cases where the Kabbalah flips everything on its head. People think of spirituality as feeling, as understanding, as enlightenment. And they think of action as it's not a spiritual thing. It's very physical. And Judaism and the Kabbalah says it's the opposite is true. The opposite is true. The ultimate transcendence cannot happen when you're just understanding and just feeling because you're still locked in self. And in a way, counterintuitively, the most spiritual thing you could do is action. Okay, so I'm willing to take some pushback because I have a few more minutes. So I'm willing to defend the thesis, but that's the thesis. If you want a radical, if you want to put Twitter 140 characters, the most spiritual action you could do, the most spiritual thing in the world is action. That's how the Kabbalah flips everything. It's counterintuitive, but that's the point here. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. On the contrary, you just answered my question that I was going to ask you a while ago. But I was just thinking that if you put tefillin every day, right, for example, then it can lead to better understanding of God and spirituality, even if it doesn't,
Yes.
if you don't combine it with Torah study.
Correct.
How do you get to that commitment? Once you put on tefillin because somebody.
So that's a good question.
But how you get the commitment to put that tefillin every day?
So, Vicky, that's a very good question. And that ties into what Benjamin asks. So what are we doing today? Where are we studying? Let's go do a mitzvah. The answer is we should do a mitzvah. But it's also a question of Judah and Joseph, who's the leader. And some points of history, Judah is the leader, Joseph is the leader. And some people would say almost always Joseph precedes Judah. With the brothers, first Joseph is the leader, then Judah. Even with the kings of Israel, first Saul is the leader from the tribe of Rachel, tribe of Benjamin, which Benjamin is the camp of Joseph. And only then do you have David. Of course, you have to study to cultivate the commitment, right? So of course you have to study. And you have to study for internalization and personal growth. And God wants personal growth. God doesn't just want that our action, the faculty of action should be connected to God. God wants that our heart and mind should also be connected. And if I'm in a relationship with you and I say, you know what, I'm the best husband in the world, I'm the most committed. I don't love you, I don't intellectually appreciate you, but I'm committed to you. I'll do everything you want. That is not a relationship because a relationship has to be, that's only one dimensional. And a relationship has to go through the heart and the mind as well. So all are necessary and study is necessary. And the question is sometimes what comes first. When you're dating somebody, you're not going to ask, well, you should ask, is this the person I want to commit to? That's a very important question. Not just as a person I love, but is this the person I want to commit to? That's a very important question. The problem is people don't ask that. But that's not enough. You have to say, is this a person who I love? Is there a Joseph element to this relationship, especially in the beginning? You have to start with the Joseph element. You have to fall in love. You have to appreciate the other person emotionally and intellectually before you can develop full commitment. So nobody is saying that Joseph is not important, and nobody is saying that Joseph is not the beginning. But the point here is if you really ask, what is the ultimate? And that's why in the end of days, what's going to be the leader over Judah and Joseph? You need both. But what's going to be the leader? The leader is going to be Judah. Because ultimately, the greatest connection, I'll say it again, just for the shock value, the greatest connection and the greatest spiritual action, the most spiritual thing you can do is action. The most greatest act of transcendence is not like some maybe spiritual seekers feel is transcendence, an escape of action. No, the greatest thing is the commitment. How you feel is not important for spirituality, for transcendence. Counterintuitive, yes. And that's why in this world, Joseph is the ruler. In this world, Joseph seems to be more attractive. But the end of days, the truth comes out, and the truth is that the ultimate connection is one of Judah. But not to negate the importance of the other one. We need both. Of course, we need both.
Rabbi Ashlag, in his introduction to the Kabbalah, he talks about what is Ra, that it stands for Ratzon Atzmi, that it's focusing on ourselves first.
Right. But again, I'm going to push back and say that we're talking about Chabad. Chabad is Chachma Bin Adat, wisdom, understanding, knowledge. And Chabad believes that you need internalization. But just like we say, the ultimate knowledge is to realize that you don't know God. But you can't just say, I don't know God. No, study, learn, understand. Fill your mind, and then realize the limit of your capacity to understand. So I would say like this. I would say that ultimately, studying and personal growth, that itself, you say, why am I studying? Why do I want personal growth? For myself, because God tells me to, right? But so yeah, if the foundation, usually Judah is a better foundation, but even for that, the beginning, you need a Joseph first. You need both. You need both. So I think he's right about the fact that if it's just about me, you need both. There's no way to square this. You need both, and there's a tension between the two. And sometimes you need more of one, and sometimes you need more of the other. But ultimately, if you have to say, where do you get to the ultimate connection, the ultimate essence, and that comes out in the Messianic era, because now we're in a world where we don't see the essence, and we don't see the truth. We don't see the ultimate truth, and the ultimate truth is that Judah prevails, because action, the lowest is rooted in the highest, and action touches the essence. So that's the pitch, and a lot more to say. But thank you for joining. And now we have to internalize, not just internalize, but also do. We need Judah and Joseph, and Judah coming together with Joseph. And I don't want to get into. I don't have time to get into this, but in every day the prayer, the Joseph is up to the Amidah, and the Amidah is Judah. Because the Amidah, you stand before God, and you're not supposed to speak loud, and it's about submission. So even though you're asking for your own needs, we can deal with that in a minute, but it's about submission, whereas up to the point it's about cultivating love. You're singing the poetry of King David. You're saying Shema Yisrael. You're meditating. You're saying V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. You should love the Lord your God. And in the Kabbalah, the first three sections of prayer is Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and the third is Yehuda. Yehuda is the submission. When you stand before God, even if I'm asking God for my own needs, it's not separate. I'm in the presence of God. It's not about me. So I say, God, give me what I need so I could serve you. But it's not about I love. It's about I submit. And prayer itself is according to the Zohar, the opening statement of the Zohar in this parsha, Judah approaches Joseph is Geula and Tefillah. Geula is the redemption and prayer. Redemption is the blessing right after the Shema, which ends Ga'al Yisrael, the Redeemer of Israel, and then you go straight into the Amidah, and there's a whole thing in the Halacha, in the Code of Law, starting from the Talmud, that you can't break between redemption and prayer. You can't break between Gal Yisrael and the Amidah. We don't even say Amen. So there's two tricks how to do it, how not to have to say Amen. The Chabad's trick is that everyone says it out loud with the Chazan. Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael. Nobody say Amen, and you go straight to the Amidah, because you can't break between Judah and Joseph, because that idea of the commitment and the commitment and the growth, the commitment and the love, they have to stand together. And that's, according to the Zohar, that's the interpretation of the rabbinic law, that you cannot stop between the Geula, the blessing of redemption, which is the blessing after the Shema, and the Amidah, because Judah and Joseph have to meet. They meet in this parsha, but they meet every day in our prayers. So that's beautiful.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Wonderful.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Be well. Take care.